Hello, everyone. Welcome to Regenmedglobal The Podcast, where we bring you the newest breakthroughs in medicine and research to help bring hope in fighting incurable diseases. My name is Shayan. Today, we're here to discuss a vaccine in the clinical trial stages that can potentially prevent lung cancer. Leading this research, we have Dr. Mary Reid. It's a pleasure to go ahead and have you. Before we get started, can you briefly tell us a little bit about what you do?
I am a professor of oncology and the chief of cancer screening and survivorship at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center in Buffalo, New York. My area of research really is in early detection of lung cancer, both through screening and also understanding the genomics and transcriptomics of what happens when people progress to lung cancer. And I think really appropriately in this space of trying to prevent progression is to have prevention trials so that we can intercept this progression and keep people from either having a original lung cancer or a recurrence of lung cancer.
Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what it is and how it works?
Sure. It's called Simivax, and it was developed in Cuba, the country. There's a very smart group of immunologists located in the Center for Immunologic Research in Havana who, sort of as a need to develop some drugs to give as second-line treatment for lung cancer patients. So they developed this vaccine. Originally it was given when people failed traditional chemo. Now they're giving it in conjunction with traditional chemo. And they've tested it in about 4,000 to 6,000 Havana or Cuban residents who have lung cancer and other cancers that are related in the same kind of epithelial pathways. But it's been used extensively in Cuba. The results of many clinical trials, and they've been published in literature that we can access in journals that we publish in the U.S. and around the world, that showed that giving Simivax helped. It didn't necessarily get rid of these lung tumors, but it did slow the growth. So progression was slowed with the treatment with Simivax. And that was seen when Simivax was given alone and then in conjunction with traditional chemo. So the vaccine is really novel. And, we're the only place in the United States. We have an FDA IND approval to test it in the United States. We're doing clinical trial 1 with people who have advanced lung cancer at the time of diagnosis. It's given in conjunction with immunotherapy in a frontline. But the other one that we have, which is the one that I run, is a prevention study. And the way Simivax works, like many vaccines, you get an injection and your body naturally develops antibodies against this protein combination. And they were very innovative. They took the framework from Neisseria meningitis, not harmful, and they attached a protein to it called epidermal growth factor. And that is, we find it, everyone has it, it circulates in our bodies, it helps with wound healing. This epidermal growth factor also helps to feed tumors by hitting a receptor called epidermal growth factor receptor. And it is one of the proteins that stimulates the growth of many tumors, many epithelial tumors, including lung, head and neck, colon, breast. And so by injecting this vaccine with this bacterial framework, the body responds to that framework. It knows this bacteria is bad, and you develop anti-EGF antibodies, which means that it attacks this EGF protein, this ligand, and sequesters it and makes it not available. And we see when we inject people with the Simivax, over a period of time, the antibody titers go up and the circulating EGFR goes down. And we believe that that is going to help to slow the growth and slow the progression of damaged airway from smoking, damaged airway from having had a lung cancer and lung cancer treatment. And we hope that that will downregulate the activity of this receptor in the lung, because we know that receptor and all the genes that are downstream from that receptor are key to growing tumors. So you give people this vaccine over 8 weeks. Every 2 weeks they get injections, and their circulating EGF goes down, their antibodies go up, and then we hope that it will slow the growth of anything that is occurring in the lungs.
When should this be used, the vaccine itself?
Well, so, in the area of lung cancer prevention, and I'll just speak to that because really that's the area that I work in, when people have an exposure, and we are particularly focused on smokers, people who have COPD or strong family history or other indications that put them at high risk for lung cancer. Aside from obviously quitting smoking, we want to intervene at this critical juncture before a tumor grows. And so many of us in the field have different agents. We have another study here that looks at metformin, but there's many agents that are being tested around the country to really intervene at this time point where someone has damage, because we know that damage precedes the development of lung cancers. So you target that damage and you try and prevent that progression to lung cancer. We also know that people who've survived lung cancer at earlier stages, usually 1, 2, or 3A, and they've been treated effectively and they have no existing tumor, they're at very high risk of a recurrence of the tumor. Either, not at the original site, but somewhere in that lung or somewhere else in their lungs. And so using a preventive agent in this particular group, sort of as a second prevention of a second lung cancer, again, because they have damage, and that damage doesn't necessarily repair. We know that because they already grew a lung cancer. And so these are the moments where you want to intervene. I mean, obviously, don't smoke, eat healthy, get exercise, all of that really keeps your risk for lung cancer low. But when you have those exposures, you want agents that are going to intervene on the progression, and we think Simivax has the potential to do that.
Compared to current strategies today for fighting or preventing lung cancer, what makes this method particularly unique?
Well, we want to use targeted therapy whenever possible, and a lot of the treatments for lung cancer targets very specific pathways, including immunotherapy, and several treatments for lung cancer target specific mutations, and there's a number of them, and that number is always growing. So it's better if you have people at high risk and you're actually going after some of those genetic irregularities of that dysfunction. So we're specifically targeting changes that have happened to this EGFR receptor. We know this is critical in the growth of tumors. And so, prevention, there are a lot of things that we recommend, healthy lifestyles and all of those, but this is meant to really target this particular receptor, which we know precedes by a long time the dysregulation of that receptor and of genes downstream. That happens way before a lung cancer occurs. And so we think that this may be a critical point. If it does work, maybe it has to be combined with other agents. But in the field of chemoprevention, or I guess now the word is interception of cancers, this is the kind of study that should be done. And it's so much easier. It's not always easy to find the thing that works in prevention, but prevention is so much easier than treatment. It's less devastating. It doesn't risk the patient's life. So you want to get agents that effectively interrupt this the sequence of events that lead to cancer. That is critical, and it will save people, and it saves them the hardship of actually having either an initial lung cancer or the second lung cancer. And so we're really hopeful that this is going to do what we hope it does.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that procedure would look like, and
Sure.
kind of how often the vaccine will be administered, and just that whole timeline?
So this is a early phase trial. So I just say that because sometimes in the early phases, they're a little more complicated than what we would see if it were a later phase study. So we find patients who are eligible and who want to join the trial. And we do a baseline bronchoscopy, and we go in, it's using anesthesia, and we sample lung tissue. So we know what their lungs look like in terms of these genetic signatures before they go on to treatment. Now the treatment is pretty rigorous. So they come in every 2 weeks for 4 doses. That's over 8 weeks. Every 2 weeks they come in and they get a shot in each arm and a shot in each leg. And that helps to prime the system. So by the time you're done with these 4 treatments, these 4 doses over 8 weeks, then you go on to a maintenance phase where you just get the shots once a month. And it allows the body to respond, and the titer goes up. And we want to keep that titer of these anti-EGF antibodies high during the treatment phase. Now, we repeat the bronchoscopy throughout the trial. We want patients to stay on it for 12 months. So for 2 months, they're in the loading phase, and then for 10 months, they're in the maintenance phase where they get it just once a month. And at the end of that, and we're talking to them all the time, we're doing a second bronchoscopy. At the end of 12 months, we do another bronchoscopy, and we really look very specifically. We do very sophisticated sequencing. We look both in their lungs, we look for markers in their blood, we look for markers in their nose, and to see the effect of the drug. And the phase of this right now is we're really trying to find out in first 20 people, so we have 12 people on treatment right now. We're still looking for other ones. We want to see what the effect in the lungs are. And if we get a strong message that this is hitting the target, that we're changing EGFR expression, that we're looking at many other biomarkers, many other genetic biomarkers downstream, then we'll go to the next stage, which would be more patients.
What kind of results have we been seeing so far with patients?
So we have, right now, because we have tissue from many of the patients who've had a baseline bronchoscopy, been treated in a second bronchoscopy, we're analyzing that right now. The one thing I can say, and this is really important with early phase trials, is the toxicity profile for Simivax is very low. And in prevention studies, you don't want to give something to people who don't have cancer where it's very toxic. The biggest complaint is soreness at the injection site, and I think since so many of us went through getting vaccinated throughout the last couple of years, we know what that pain at the injection site feels like. And not everybody gets it, and some people get it and don't get it the next time they get injected. And that's really been the biggest complaint. We haven't had any severe toxicities. And that's really important because, especially for the lung cancer survivors who are on the trial, they already went through, all the treatment and the sickness, and so we want to be able to give agents that are relatively easy to give and that don't have a toxicity profile. So I think in the next couple months, we'll have our first batch of tissue samples to know really what kind of an effect we're seeing with the injection. I'm hoping, this sort of complements what was done in Cuba. They didn't really sample the tissue in the same way that we are. Part of that is a technology challenge that Cuba has. But we know that in actual lung cancers, the growth of lung cancers was slowed. So we do believe that there's an effect, and we're hoping as we look at these tissues that we can really narrow down what that effect is from a genomic standpoint.
Who would be an ideal candidate for someone to enroll in this clinical trial?
So, they have to have smoked for 30 years. And for people across the country in various parts of the country, that's not really a problem. There's a lot of smokers. They could have quit smoking, but they have to have that kind of baseline exposure, and because we really want to see that their lung tissue has some initiated damage, and we know with that threshold. That is for the high-risk people. For the people who've had lung cancer previously, we need them to have a stage 1, 2, or 3B or 3A, so that they actually got treated and are cured, and in the last 12 months have not had a recurrence of lung cancer. Other risk factors like having obstructive lung disease, we want to make sure that that high-risk group really is high risk. So in addition to the smoking exposure, we look at other risk factors for lung cancer in conjunction with that smoking exposure. For the folks who've had a lung cancer, again, they have to be 12 months out. We do a CT at baseline, so we want to make sure they don't have any recurrence or they don't have a lung cancer, so that we're sure that we're treating people who don't already have the disease that's active. And again, they come to our clinical research unit, which is where we test all of our drugs, and there's a lot of asking people about toxicities, so that we make sure that if someone isn't responding well or is having a reaction to the drug, which we have not had, we can catch that early and treat it accordingly.
Why is this clinical trial and this vaccine so important, and what kind of impact could it have? And why should people care about this?
Well, you don't want to rely on treatments that haven't been tested. And so doing it in a clinical trial allows us to control a lot of things. I mean, people are different. They come in, they've had different exposures, they've had different lifestyles. We can't control that. But you really want all of these clinical trials to be done in a very standard way by people who are experienced, because if this works, we want to eventually hope that a lot of people can take it, and you can't base that kind of broad spectrum treatment on evidence that at the beginning is not good. You want to make sure your evidence that it's effective, and eventually we'll go to a randomized clinical trial. But right now it's a single arm, so everyone who signs up and who joins gets the drug. That's, we look at their pre-dose and we look at their post-treatment tissue within the person. But clinical trials, you really want good, well-run clinical trials with valid data to be the basis for treatment. It can't just be anecdotal. And that's why what the Cubans have done in advance of this is really important, because they published in exceptionally good journals. They've had peer-reviewed evaluation of their study methods, and they have a very well-controlled drug. You want the drug to be the same across everyone, and administered in the same way, and evaluated in the same way. And so that's why the clinical trial is so important. Now, the fear of lung cancer is not trivial. This is a bad disease. And for people who've survived it, it's a fear. And if we can find something that would change that trajectory to having a recurrent lung cancer, that would be fabulous. Because there's a lot of people, there's 200,000+ cases of lung cancer a year. And many of them are late stage, but many of them are early stage. And we want to find those drugs, or that drug that helps people live without having that cancer return or develop.
If all the stars align, how soon could something like this be widely available?
Well, so if you go to Cuba, you can get it. And for a long time, we had Americans and Canadians and people all over the world flying to Cuba to buy this drug. So it's not as if it's complete, but you have to go to Cuba. And so, sometimes that's the challenge. Drug development takes a long time. And, it's going to be, within this next year, we're going to know whether in a prevention setting, this drug is hitting the target and affecting these genes that we need to affect. So it's going to be a few years before we would open up to a bigger trial. But that's the process of doing it. And again, the next trial, we're going to add more people to this if we're seeing a good result in the tissue. Up to, we're doing now, looking for 20 people. We'll be looking for more people, but then we'll design a study that will actually compare head to head, people who got the drug, people who didn't get the drug, and do it in a randomized fashion, because that's the strongest evidence you can generate, is a randomized clinical trial. In the next phases, we will open it up to other sites, and we have collaborators who are already using Simovax for our phase 2 study for advanced lung cancer patients. So we have some sites around the country, not just in Buffalo, and hopefully with the right results, we'll expand to those sites, because they can have bronchoscopies done in other places, and they can get the drug injected in other places, and we can have the same quality of sampling and the same follow-up. So, it's not, it's not off the charts. Then in the next few years, we'll see a much bigger trial. And we hope that the drug will be available after that for wider use. But it takes a while. And taking a while is good, because you have to be careful, because you have to treat people with something that works. You don't want to just be putting them through all of this for something that doesn't actually do anything. That would be wrong.
Dr. Reid, any other final thoughts or anything else that you'd like to share? This has been some amazing information.
Well, I think, this is the kind of science that we want to move forward. And testing it in human beings is always that is where we're trying to affect cancer. So I'm very optimistic given the data that we've seen from Cuba. We're hoping that at least this early phase, this first 20 patients, we'll be able to wind this up and, by probably in 12 to 15 months, have some results that we can share with the world about the effectiveness of this drug. But there are a lot of people at risk. I mean, lung cancer is the most deadly cancer that we have. It kills more than most of the other cancers, major cancers combined. And so something that would intervene in this process, even among people who smoked, who keep smoking or didn't smoke, we have to find these kind of drugs to keep it from progressing to a tumor, because a tumor is so risky for someone's life. It really changes their lives and their chance of living a full life. So this is super important, and if anyone is interested, they can call. They can look up on Roswell Park's website, roswellpark.org, and find the clinical trial. We can evaluate them over the phone. We've had people from all over the country coming in to get treated, and that is a good way to keep up with the progress we're making, and hopefully we'll have a breakthrough in the next couple of years.
Dr. Reid, thank you so much for your time. It was truly a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.